to this Parliament a planning and development bill that sought to do many things. Indeed, I would consider it among the most in-depth, far-reaching, ambitious legislation that this administration has brought to date. And that is very stiff competition, sir. But what the Planning and Development Act of 2019 sought to do was to really reorient how we consider development and planning, physical planning and development in this country. Now, just to give a small bit of the context for those who may not recall, one of the perennial complaints with respect to competitiveness and doing business in Barbados has to have been, and in some measure, although less so, continues to be in some way, the issue of the speed of investment and development based on the response of the Town and Country Development Planning Office and the related agencies. That was the backdrop against which, in June and July of 2018, a few short weeks after coming to service as a government, we began the process of extensive consultation with stakeholders to look at where the 53-year-old Act had gaps, where it could be strengthened, and what we needed to do in order to make it more responsive to the needs of Barbadians, to the needs of the business community, to the needs of foreign investors and the kinds of investment that we were hoping to attract. And so we had a series of consultations with Barbadians, and we spent a lot of time working on a revised act, the Planning and Development Act of 2019. And that did a few things, including removing the power of a single individual, the chief town planner, to have the kind of sweeping, in some cases almost discretionary power to make certain decisions on applications, and replace that structure with a planning and development board and a series of subcommittees. The chief town planner is replaced by a director of the Planning and Development Department, and these are some of the changes that that Act brought into force. Now, the Act also, as it stands now, as passed, I should say, also seeks to attach specific timelines to certain kinds of applications. Because in order for investment to be effective, in order for it to really drive growth, one thing it has to be, and one thing the environment has to be, is predictable. And so we wanted to make sure that when someone submits an application to the Planning and Development Department, they have a reasonable expectation of when they should have a response. And so that we said that the largest kind of application, the most in-depth kind of application, those that require an environmental impact assessment, should take no more than 12 weeks to be decided. Now, I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that that is a tall order. But we weren't afraid of challenging ourselves in that way, because we are and we were then and remain committed now to making sure that we meet that challenge and that we meet those targets. One of the other things that the Act seeks to do and empowers us to be able to do is to change our orientation from strictly enforcement to really being able to facilitate development. So it's not just that we are regulators, which we are, and which role we take very seriously, but we believed then and continue to believe now, and these new amendments that I will introduce are further to that position. But we believe that agencies such as the Planning and Development Department have to be able to encourage investment in a way that is sustainable and that does not do harm to the people of the country, to the natural environment, and to the other social justice targets and principles that we hold true. And so one of the things that Act introduced was the idea of a conditional approval or a provisional refusal. It meant that rather than just saying no to an application as presented, what we would do is say to the applicant, we cannot approve the application as you have presented it, but were you to make certain changes in keeping with perhaps some of the requirements of the Barbados Water Authority or some of the requirements of the Coastal Zone Management Unit or other partners, that we would be willing to approve the application. Another introduction has to do with the pre-consultation. So what often happens is that a developer, an applicant might have an idea for a development and they want a certain sense of comfort that if they proceed, they can have a reasonable expectation of an approval, or at least they know what they can expect. Now, it means that you bring the idea of a pre-consultation firmly into the process, because what you don't want is something that seems to be just a casual prior conversation. A casual prior conversation, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, is apt to get you in trouble. You want to bring any discussion that you have with an applicant into the process, to make it an official part of the process, in order to make sure that you maintain the regulatory function of the agency, because the Planning and Development Department has a very serious responsibility to the public to make sure that developments do no harm. So you need to maintain that role and that transparency. But we believe that it is a fair ask of any applicant, someone who's building a home or someone who is putting up a major development, to want to have an understanding of what is or is not required, or what would or would not be acceptable. And so a pre-consultation is something that we also introduced so that we could give some guidance within the resources available. So we won't be able to give too much guidance to the detailed plans themselves. The applicant has to take responsibility for that. But to give some guidance to what would be acceptable under the legislation. And so these are the kinds of things that new legislation was able to bring into force in 2019, last year. Now, at the time when the original act was passed, there were certain steps that had to be taken in order to give the legislation its full force and to really bring it into the ease of doing business space that we wanted. Now, it is no secret in Barbados that the issue of the ease of doing business is one that is very topical. And even as we continue to work through a lot of the socioeconomic issues and challenges that the country faces, it is a recurring point. Really, that there are some structural issues in the way that the public and the private sector facilitate or do not facilitate well enough business in Barbados. And we, for that reason, as I've said in this chamber before, we went to the World Bank, the people who designed and administered the instrument, the Doing Business Report, the Doing Business Index. It is their report, it is their measurement. And we said to them, okay, so you are the people that make this determination. So what we would like you to do is to provide some technical assistance to us, to tell us what is it that we can do to be able to improve not just the ranking, not just the number from 129 out of 190 countries, but to be able to, in a way that is substantial, improve and affect the lives of Barbadian people by improving the doing business environment and the competitiveness environment in the country. And so they came in and had some consultations with the range of ministries and departments and agencies that are responsible, everyone from the Office of the Attorney General to the Ministry of Commerce, to the Ministry of International Business and Industry, and really almost every government department or agency that has some responsibility for the information that you see in that report. Because that report covers everything from starting a business, so it includes KIPO and the work that we have to do on reforming that side of things. But it also includes, importantly, the issue of construction permits and building starts and dealing with insolvency and a range of issues. And so the World Bank came out with what they call a reform note. The reform note is really a roadmap for how a country can start to improve that number, that rank in the Doing Business Index. Now, I have to say that that is not just an artificial number. That's not just an artificial rank. And we know how these indices are. We know that if other countries move quickly, that we will fall even if we've stood still. We know the dynamics of these kinds of measures. But the fact is that this report is one of the things that countries look at. This report is one of the things that banks, international financial institutions, that investors in other countries and other jurisdictions look at when they are trying to make a decision about whether they should come and invest in a country. Because people don't just move as a business. People move as whole people. People move as people who want to know how easy it will be to get a road fix. How quickly does a country move in terms of responding to infrastructure issues? How quickly does a country move in terms of responding to immigration issues? And so people look to see what is the general environment in the country for getting things done. I mean, that is essentially what it measures. And so the reform note provided us with some of that information. But I have to say, importantly, that we're not just relying on the World Bank to tell us what we need to improve. Because we, as Barbadians who live here and work here and live our lives here every day, we also know that there are things that are not in that report that we need to improve. And so what we did was we put together a Doing Business Subcommittee of Cabinet, chaired by the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East, the Honourable Prime Minister. And that subcommittee is really tasked with coming up with what are the changes you are going to make in your ministry, in your departments and agencies to make sure that we meet the targets that we've set. And so we've met many times. Each ministry has an action plan, but we went further, sir. We also put together what we call a Doing Business Committee of non-state actors. And I wanted to use the term non-state actors because it's not just about the private sector. It's not just the private sector that does business. We all do. And so we wanted to make sure that we had the formal private sector, but that we also have other people who are users who can say to us, well, this is my experience of doing X or doing Y, of sending an application here, of trying to deal with BRA, of trying to deal with KIPO. We wanted to make sure that we had other perspectives and not just the government side. So the way that we've done this work so far is that the reform note has chapters that deal with each of the different parts of the Doing Business report. And so there are colleagues in the private sector who are tasked with working with each ministry that's responsible for those chapters. So for example, the chapter that I happen to be responsible for in my ministry is the one that has to do with getting a construction permit, which is the reason that I'm on my feet in this chamber today. But there are other chapters that other colleagues are working on. And the reason we did it that way is that, you know, sometimes it becomes easy for us to sit down together in a big room and talk about all of the various things that we find broken. That part is actually easy. What is slightly more difficult is to sit in a group with people who challenge us, with people who have ideas that we perhaps haven't thought about before, to sit down and write line by line what are the actionable solutions and to get those done in a timely way. And so that is what these two committees working together are doing, have been doing over the past weeks, and are now from this week starting to scale up action from this Friday to get together and look at those various issues. Mr. Speaker, sir, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that no one is waiting for us to get our act together to move to a digital environment. And if we are really going to be competitive as a jurisdiction, we have to move rapidly. But not only do we have to move rapidly, the pandemic has shown us that, in fact, we have the capacity to move rapidly. Look at how many people have been able to migrate their services online, to build e-commerce platforms, to just very quickly respond to the urgency of the time. And while this is a very challenging time, it perhaps has created the opportunity for us to see that we are equal to the task and that we are equal to the time. And so a lot of the work that has been going on, I know that in between the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, a lot of work has been done on online payment systems. And we each have our particular inclinations in terms of how we like to be in an online environment, what we think works well. Sometimes these things are built and they have bugs and they have to be worked out before they're fully rolled out. And so that in itself is a process. More and more we have to make sure that we get things right as early as we can. Sometimes we don't, but we are perfectly willing to be able to correct quickly and go again. So in the context of COVID, as we heard earlier in the earlier debates that came today, there are a series of measures that we have introduced. Among those measures is a $200 million Barbados tourism facility. What that facility is meant to do is, in this downtime in the tourism sector, it is meant to give the opportunity to those people who operate in the sector, not just hotels, but any attraction that would fit within that sector. Any tourism-based attraction, hotel, restaurant, anything that is very heavily geared towards the visitor economy, to be able to get low-interest financing to do refurbishments and other kinds of improvements. One of the other things that we've said is that this is an important time for the sector to be able to train, to be able to help upskill people who work in the sector. And so this is a time when we really need to do the foundation work to encourage investment in the country. What we've said, what Barbadians may have heard in listening to some of the discussions that we've been having in the context of our economic response to COVID-19, is that we need to get economic activity going. And in particular, in the construction sector, the public health experts advise us that this is a sector that is perhaps well placed to be able to implement some of the public health protocols that are required. And so, for example, you would see that we reintroduced construction a bit earlier than other sectors because we felt that it was a bit easier to be able to implement some of the distancing and other protective protocols that were required. But that's not the only reason. One of the reasons is that we know of the over 40,000 claims that have come in to the National Insurance. And the only thing that's really going to allow us to have a sustainable response is to get people back to work safely. So safe people doing safe work in a safe country is how we've termed it in our discussions. And this sector is one that encourages that allows for that. And I want to be very clear that this is not just about big investment. We need that. We do need to level up in terms of the number of hotel and tourism related plants, refreshing the hotel and tourism related plants and attractions, and making sure that they are value for money. We keep saying that Barbados does not necessarily compete on price but on product, but at the same time, people have to feel as if they're getting value for money. And a part of that is making sure that we can do the kinds of refurbishments that make people feel that they're in a fresh and interesting place. But this is not just about major investments. We continue to have the focus on major investments because we need to be able to balance that kind of investment with quality of life. And I want to make a slight divergence here, Mr. Speaker, sir, to say something that has been on my mind. This work that we are doing is about the balance of development. I do not see it possible, and I say this as somebody who I consider myself to be a warrior for social justice. I do, have always been. But I do not see it possible, sir, to have no infrastructural development and to be able to deliver a certain quality of life for Barbadians. I do not see how we can have no development, how we can stay at a one-story and two-story kind of hotel product, not go any higher, not go any farther, and deliver a certain quality of life. It is about the balance of development. And that is why the planning and development process that we have set up is so inclusive. That is why there is such an insistence on town hall meetings as a part of your environmental impact assessment. That is why the environmental impact assessment itself includes a social impact assessment. That is why we allow for people to write, to call, to send in objections, because we have to balance, as a government, the public interest against the public mischief. But we have to grow. In development economics, they teach us that growth is not a sufficient condition to well-being. It is not a sufficient one. We need other things, but it is necessary. And so I say all that because I want us all to understand that balance and to contribute to that balance. We consult with the Barbados Sea Turtle Project. We consult with the National Trust and with all of the different stakeholders that we believe can bring the social justice discussion to the fore, and we are happy, we encourage that. If we don't hear from them, we call them. We want the perspective. But I want us as Barbadians to understand that there are certain things that we are going to hold dear. We are going to make sure that there's not environmental degradation of our very small island. This is what we have to leave for our children. They don't have two Barbadoses. So we are going to ensure that that does not happen. Beach access is something that if you're a Bajan, you've got to be able to walk through a track and get to the beach. You've got to be able to walk across a pasture and get to the beach. Beach access is important. We are going to maintain that for Barbadians. We know that there's certain things that we want to feel as if we live in a tropical place. We don't want to live in a concrete jungle. And we agree. And that is why we have a physical development plan that is being amended, that again we're bringing back to the people of Barbados for consultation, that looks at that balance of development. But it is about balance. And so I want to say that as we have the conversation about what's not good for the country and what's good for the country, let us understand that we cannot stay stuck in the same place and expect to see progress. We cannot want for the young men and women who have never had any opportunity to find opportunity and not create jobs. in the construction sector or in the area of development. And I'm not just talking about labor work or masonry, or that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kinds of high-value jobs that can be of use in this area of work. There are all kinds of opportunities for young people in a country that is growing, that is developing, that is building, that are not just about going to work on a site. Some people will want to go and work on a site. There's tremendous opportunity and there's tremendous income earning potential in doing that. But the other side of the balance that we have to create is also that we also have to create businesses among those people, among these young men and young women who are in my constituency, who are in St. Michael South, who are in St. Michael East and Southeast and St. Thomas and St. Peter, so that they're not just going to get a job, but so that they're starting companies, so that they're hiring their neighbors, and so that they're also bidding on projects. That is the kind of Barbados that I want to see created. That is not just about providing opportunities to a handful of companies, but providing opportunities to new companies started by Barbadian young people who are able to have a seat at the table that we build together. But it is about balance. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, these amendments seek to close the circle, seek to make complete what we started in January of 2019. When we had those consultations then, some of the feedback that we received had to do with the fact that, well, when you get a planning approval, you still have many other places to go. So that the planning approval itself is not a guarantee of a building start. You have to go to the Environmental Protection Department, and they have a whole separate process. And it doesn't make sense for the Planning and Development Department to get back to you in 12 weeks, and you have to wait much longer for the Environmental Protection Department. It doesn't make sense for town planning to get back to you in 12 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 weeks, and you have to wait for the building control function in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance to get back to you within whatever time. And so one of the major changes that we are bringing to this House today, sir, allows for the creation of a one-stop shop, is how we term it. And we agreed in those consultations that the one-stop shop mechanism would create a more seamless approach to the facilitation of investment through the planning and the building permit process. So it brings the two together, and that it would reduce delays and simplify the process for the applicant. Now, in town planning, we have to deal with a lot of agencies. And I think that sometimes what the applicant doesn't see is everything that's happening behind the curtain, everything that's happening underwater. So that it looks as if you're standing still, but really you're swimming furiously under the water to try and get all of this done. And pulling all this together in a one-stop shop makes that process go more smoothly because it is a part of the same system. Now, in order to have that one-stop shop, we would have to bring in the functions of the EPD. We would have to bring in the functions of the Barbados Building Authority with respect to the proposed assignment of responsibility for the issuing of construction permits for building development. Now, in order to do this, we would have then to have an amendment to Part 5 of the 2019 Act that looks at building, engineering, and subdivision plans. And we would also have to have other legislative amendments. And so we had consultations with the relevant ministries. and agreed that this was something that would make sense for the people of Barbados, and that would speed up the process that applicants would have to go through. What we also agreed was that we would not want the two things to happen simultaneously, and I'll tell you quickly what I mean. It is that applicants felt that they wanted to get an approval, they wanted to get an indication that their application would be approved before going to the detailed design drawings, which in a lot of cases can be very expensive. So that made sense. So we agreed that we would do it in two phases. We go quickly through the planning approval, well, the planning decision, I would say, and use the same application number and attach that to the stage of the building permit when the detailed designs and drawings are required. And so that was the system that we came up with, but importantly, you keep the same application number. So you are going through the process as one single application. And so there would be a planning control phase, which was the Town and Country Planning Department, which will newly be called the Planning and Development Department, and then the building regulations phase, more detailed drawings. And for complex applications, these will be appraised against the building code by independent external professionals. That's important. One, the idea of a building code. That is something that has been discussed over and over for many, many years. The extent to which a building code for Barbados has to be reviewed, agreed, and put fully into force. And this amendment allows us to do that. The drawings, therefore, will be registered with the department when approved, and we would have independent professionals inspect the works at different stages and report to the department. The department will then issue the final occupancy certificate, and registers will be kept by the department. Now, those same independent external professionals will be required to have professional indemnity insurance in order to be registered under their relevant professional acts. That's a very important step in this process, because it means that if you have people who are acting independently, who we are asking to certify these drawings, then it means that they have to have professional indemnity insurance, and that the legislation that governs how they operate has to be robust enough that they are highly motivated to do their work in a responsible way. And so that is the direction in which this legislation takes us. It means, though, that there are other legislative implications. The establishment of the one-shop system would require the current amendments that we are now debating. They would also require that we repeal and replace the Health Services Building Regulations of 1969, the revision and adoption of the Barbados Building Code, and further capacity building in the Planning and Development Department, which is underway. So that the amendments before the House today take account of all those. Provision for the submission of detailed building plans to the Planning and Development Department following the grant of planning permission, the promulgation of building regulations that include a building code and guidelines, and the transfer of liability for certifying compliance of complex building plans with the building regulations to registered professionals who carry professional liability insurance. Now, we believe, sir, that these are very important steps that we have to take. These steps then require some consequential amendments to other parts of the Act. So, for example, we need to change the title of the head of the Planning and Development Department from Chief Town Planner to Director, and these are the kinds of amendments that you see before the House today. And we also have, as a matter of urgency, to make the kinds of amendments that would include penalties for professional misconduct among the professions that we're asking to be involved in the building control process. The other amendments that I would wish to make reference to, sir, are the increase of the time frame for the delivery of a decision of the appeal panel from 14 to 28 days. We did have some discussions, and what was suggested was that more time is required to adequately consider appeals, and some other small consequential amendments, sir, that are related. Now, the repeal and replacement of the health services regulations means that those regulations that were before primarily public health oriented are now going to overlap with planning control and building control. And so it was necessary to be able to expand the remit of those regulations. Now, on the matter of the building code, those of us who are not involved in this area of work on a day-to-day basis may not find that this very exciting, but I will tell you that the number of responses that we've gotten to the question of Barbados having a building code has been overwhelming, and I'll tell you why. As a country that is so vulnerable to the climate crisis, we have to have a definitive position about building standards. It has to be a position that is enforceable, but it also has to be one that is not burdensome. And so that is one of the reasons that the member for St. Andrew and the member for St. John, in their capacity within the Ministry of Housing, have been working on making sure that we have standards and regulations for affordable, climate resilient housing. But we do need to have standards for housing, because countries that don't find themselves taking on debt and financing to recover, to rebuild after a hurricane, rebuilding perhaps in a way that is not according to an appropriate code, and then losing all that infrastructure again. But when you lose the infrastructure, you don't lose the debt, you still have to pay it back, and it puts you in a worse position. It puts the occupant in a worse position, and it puts the country in a worse position. And so we do have to finalize this business of having a building code and pulling this all into one process. Before I sit, sir, I have to say something about the planning process in general. We wanted to make sure that, having done the work to understand what was necessary to change the legislation, what people needed, what the sector needed, we also wanted to make sure that we were otherwise in a position to administer this act, to bring this act into force. Now that means a lot of changes, and the Town and Country Development Planning Department is in a tremendous change management process. One of the very important things that we had to do during COVID-19 was to make it possible to electronically submit applications. And people can now do that using different email addresses. But we realized that this is not enough, that we have to have a fully online digital presence for people to use. We want to be that nobody has to go to the Planning and Development Department and push the door and walk in and stand in front of the cashier or stand in front of the front desk. That's where we're driving to. There's certain issues involved in that. You know, there's the notion that some plans are very difficult to digitize, and we've gone the length and breadth of all the best jurisdictions in the world looking at how they have been able to do it, and we are working towards that. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that, you know, those of us in this chamber accustomed to licks. And we probably have developed some good alligator skin, crackle skin to make it Bajan in response. The officers with whom we work also get some response and a sense of the disquiet in the public when things do not work well. And they should. But I feel that when they begin to rise to the task, then they should also get that encouragement and recognition. And I have to say that not just the officers in the Town and Country Development Planning Office and in the planning unit of the Prime Minister's office, but honestly, week by week, when I chair the planning meeting, where we look at applications that may be stuck or may have some issues and we try to resolve them, officers from across ministries and departments and agencies sit together in one place and troubleshoot and think about what the issues are and come up with suggestions, and they have all contributed to this change management process. And I want to say publicly today, thanks to those officers. Their work and commitment has been outstanding. And, you know, I am not a planner by profession, although I'm starting to feel more and more like one. But I would say that that I do have an appreciation, more of an appreciation every day for how physical planning and the way that we use natural and built resources and that balance is really so key to everything that we do. It is key to whether we're able to grow food on vast lands or whether we need to go vertical with our farming. It is key to how whether we're able to build offshore islands. It's key to how we use the coast and how we maintain the coastal environment, how we maintain water courses and gullies, everything that we do. How we're able to interact with our natural environment is a matter of planning and development. And these officers have done tremendous work. That work includes the e-planning system, which we will soon be able to roll out, which is a very important part of this work because it means that you can go online, you can enter an application number, and you can see where your application is, who it's with, who is the person that's holding up the show. Well, not the person, but the ministry or the department or the agency. Where is it in the process? What are the issues? You can apply online. You can also, if you have business with a financial institution, you can also authorize that financial institution to access the documents that they need in order to be able to process your application with them and so on. This work has been thoughtful. We're not ready yet because we've only just been able to get the electronic stamping of documents. Mr. Speaker, if I seem a little bit too excited about the idea of electronic stamping, it is because it is a game changer for us in planning. And it speaks to what the Attorney General spoke to earlier, the fact that a stamp affixed electronically will then have the force of law to be able to be used as an official approval with respect to the legislation. And that is important for lots of people because it means that you don't then have to come back to pick up your stamped physical plans to take them back. This saves time, it saves money, and it really means that you're able to do your business more easily. And so we are perfecting the e-planning platform and the portal. We started with the way that we talk to each other internally to make sure that our consultations are done properly, and we will soon be ready to roll it out to the public. The final thing I will say on this change management process in the planning department is that there are also other things that we're considering in terms of how do we make the public more included and more involved. Now, we want to make sure that it is easy for people to have their voices heard with respect to new developments or respect to any works that are going on. So that people don't have to make a post on Facebook, but that they understand that they can be a part of the process. It is important from a social justice perspective that people feel and know that there is a process. And so one of the things that we are exploring as well as part of the change management process is the display of application numbers on the sites of major developments. It's done in other jurisdictions. And so it means that rather than having to ask, well, what is this that's happening, a member of the public can see the application number clearly affixed on the site, can go to the Planning and Development Department website and portal, put it in and understand what is happening. See what the project is, see when the town hall meeting is, and be able to have his or her say. Now, these are the things that we, over the next few weeks, are looking at developing. We continue to be in constant consultation with the stakeholders in the sector. We have had a very, I would say, free and open conversation and continue to. There are different interests always. Our job is to protect and manage and balance the public interest, the interests of all Barbadians. But this work has been a tremendous joint effort of several stakeholders and ministries, private, public, third sector. And we believe that this is going to go a very long way to improving access to opportunities in this sector for Barbadians. It's going to go a very long way to making sure that Barbados is the kind of investment jurisdiction that people want to come to and do business in. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm obliged to you. Sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Second, I said.
Honourable Member for St. Michael East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to be long, but it's a business Sorry about that. New technology, probably obsolete technology. Mr. Speaker, I can't allow this session to go by, especially when we are talking about structural changes in governance in relation to management, especially when we are talking about new formations in different committees and a very casual effort to identify the role of the Ministry of the Environment, or whether the Department, Environmental Protection Department. I feel very strong that if we are now building new economies across the globe as a consequence of climate change, the philosophy that has driven development over the years must put environment at the center of whatever they're doing. Development over the years was driven based on an industrial base driven by fossil fluid. Almost everything around us, the development was driven by that. We are now talking about different forms of energy, solar energy, methane gas, wind energy, things of that kind, alternative energies moving towards a green economy. And because I don't want this thing to be too long, issues in relation to making plans for people to have free access to the waters surrounding the lands of Barbados probably cause me more so now than ever to at least put my input into this discussion. Within the last 24 hours, I have been confronted with all different forms of abuse. Whatever motivated the abuse, some of the reasons for that, I would not make mention of that here. But access to the beach lands and reforms which the honourable member just made reference to in terms of the laws and so on. Laws are related to accretion, where some obsolete view way back in the days of York is now applied in modern times and continue to give people the right to lands, especially on the coastal area, unlimited rights, where the sea goes back 1,000,000 miles, the land, the geography of the land spreads and goes back with the ocean itself. We have to focus our attention to this concept of accretion, which is outdated. But in law and among all political parties, we continue to ignore this. The Barbadian public sees it as offensive that we are citizens of Barbados. We have been enjoying rights, social rights on the beaches of Barbados. And then we have people that because they buy a few square inches of land and this accretion exists, then a man can then add 1,000,000 miles on it as long as the sea goes in or out. He then has the right. Theoretically, it doesn't even make philosophical sense or legal sense. So when we begin to talk about progressive changes in structures, we also got to talk about progressive changes in functions and execution. So we can change all the structures, put in all the committees, add in the individuals within the committees itself, and if all things remain the same at all times, then we are still going to be working and presiding and managing over a society that is experiencing lots of tensions, lots of antagonism within the society itself. And I figured that that was an important point. We have current issues of that kind. I know we want to invite and have investors, especially at a time when an economy is contracting, not because of incompetence of anybody, but even coming out of the experience which we have had with COVID. And my fear is that as a result of ignoring those other aspects of the social rights of Barbadians, that we're likely to continue to open up the market to people because we want to attract them. And then we allow these things to continue in perpetuity, which is a form of abuse that precedes even the settlement of the country itself in the 17th century. So I am very concerned about that. While I support the steps that are being taken, I believe that is an issue that we have to take into consideration. I'm going to try to go through these things quickly. Now, I also know that there's a necessity for a building code in the society. But in a very pragmatic sense, what I am experiencing is because of all that is happening around us, the society is being driven back into abject poverty. Again, no superficial analysis of management and whether this government is more efficient than the other government. Fundamental things are happening around us. That all the index, whoever the scientist is, will tell you that poverty is constantly increasing to a level that we have never seen it before. In the meantime, there are lots of poor people, children, that under the old systems of the family structure, those poor people, children used to live within the extended family underneath the same roof. That kind of behavior do not exist in Barbados anymore. We might live on the same land space, but we're not living under the same roof. Even if it's something, I don't know what you would call it, people building small units, just the length of the bodies so that they can sleep at night and stretch out their legs, and they're made out of card and cardboard, all kind of strange compressed materials, plywood, and in the heavy rains that we also talk about. These are realities, and that's what I'm saying, that sometimes some of these backward planners that we got in the system want to hold on to certain practices. I call them best practices, and don't want to make the additional changes. If you're going to bring a building code, I don't know how long it's going to take us, but we got a reason, because sometimes the building code might relate to a certain middle income and upper class individual in the society, but you can't insist on building codes for small people unless they got to make some level of concessions for them. Because the most houses for low-income people that are being made today, I believe if you go to the lumber company, if you see the amount of plywood sheets and damaged ply too, not even marine ply on it, or any special pine or purple heart or green heart or any of this kind of material, people are buying in bulk plywood sheets and making houses. The state must take into consideration, if we are to have resilient housing in the system, is the state going to supplement it? These are real important debates that I am not sure if at the highest levels we are taking these things into consideration. Are we going to supplement small people in constructing houses? Or are we going to find ourselves in a situation in the next 10 years or so with many homeless people in the society? If tomorrow morning you get up and there is a hurricane in Barbados, all of the things that we now call units and houses, whatever words we choose to use, all these things gone. So resilience at the level of the low-income people, it is something that we have to look at and see what role the state would play. I don't know if we will continue in the future, especially under the Ministry of Housing and Lands. And this is not an attack on anybody. I really believe I can speak freely sometimes. My view is we have to make a decision if the state is going to be helpful to the people who live in poverty. So it means that the state would have to decide, now there is a policy completely different to the policies that we have seen in the last few years under both governments, where we're going to concentrate on building more and more low-income houses. I don't know if you're going to put them at the disposal of a person through the system of a rent to buy. I don't know if you're going to continue to struggle with what rents, monthly rents we will pay, because we have a variety of monthly rents for the same land space or the same room space. So you running from sometimes about $45 or $50-something a week or a month for housing in the Ivy and in the Pine, to when you get to the Grotto and you get to different parts of the country. So in my view, the whole planning itself, not related to any specific ministry, the whole planning itself is something that we have to sit back and look at carefully and see how we are going to continue to move forward as a government. I also know that sometimes there will be difference in views, not only with the people that are so fortunate to be in this room, but there are other people at the technical level that holds a completely different view. So sometimes when you want to change policy and direction, you then have to struggle against that bureaucracy that was part and parcel of the practices of the old habits and don't want to let go. So you keep changing instruments over and over again, but then when you come to execution, the functions of the departments that you set up, the same thing continues over and over again. And that is a debate that we have to have, even if it means that in some cases, we have to be able to exercise greater authority. I just figure, sir, that I will make mention of some of those things. There is a necessity, no doubt, Minister, as you indicated, there's a necessity for, in my view, I don't even know if I would call it reform. We have to look back at some of the laws that gives us strength in order to get things done. Things go before town planning departments, and I think that you are correct. The town planner approved things. I believe that there are a number of cases in point that you can clearly identify. And then there are other issues, important issues that need to be examined. There are persons who also get in completions or a certificate of completion of the construction of buildings, and then when you examine the buildings, you want to know how you get this certificate of completion of the construction of the building. And then government finds itself in great difficulty with a big elephant owned by the state or owned by the private sector, and then we have to be struggling to determine what do we do with the building. The building stops there, some in 2, 3, and 4 years, 5 years, and so on. Millions of dollars in investment. Sometimes in order to keep the building in a good, healthy environment, you have to run air conditioners during the day when not one human being, the only thing that living in there might be a mosquito. You have to do that. So I think that we have to take our work extremely serious as we go along. I think there are laws, property laws that we have to examine very, very carefully. I would really love also to see a greater appreciation for heritage buildings and so on, and the entire government, especially the ministries like the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of the Environment, the Heritage Departments within the various ministries, and town planning, looking to see how we can preserve some of the historic buildings and all of that. And I think that those considerations are worthy of consideration. I know in a very genuine good spirit, with great progressive thought, sometimes we put lots of things on the table, but I'm saying that sometimes we have to monitor them. We have to make sure that whatever we intended when we make the required changes, sometimes in legislation, that other people come along with us and understand this is what the change in the legislation is all about, and that you would not continue to impose your old habits in the practice of the execution of something contrary to what the government intended to achieve. And this happens over and over again. The government has a clear intention. The intentions are clearly articulated in here. But then when the instrument has been given the accent or the approval through the entire system, then the same people that was executing is the same people that would not even, if they don't even know that the legislation or the changes exist. So we have to be a lot more vigilant on these issues. I strongly believe that some of the recommendations that were made today are worthy. I fully support the recommendations. I understand, sir, that everybody would like to go home, especially in the present physical environment. But I just want to, in a very brief way, add a little to what the representative in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the South Central and the young visionary is contributing to the discussions within the House of Assembly. And to be truthful, I wanted to go home every Saints as well. But because I wanted to hear exactly how she was going to rationalize the document which she had before us, I decided I'll be here at least and say a few words, which I'm hoping that she perceives them as complimentary to what she has already said. Thank you very much, Mr.
Honorable member, turn off the mic, please. Honorable member for the Microsoft Center.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for St. Michael East, who, in his capacity as Minister with Responsibility for the Environment, has been instrumental in getting these amendments before this chamber. I want to very briefly, in 90 seconds, give the assurance to the honourable member that the idea of resilient housing, having a building code that is able to represent and insist on resilient housing, is not mutually exclusive from supporting those who are poor. Poor people have to be safe too. We have to put our minds and our energy behind the idea that people who are poor in this country have a right to be safe as well. So that while it might be all they can afford to put up something that is made out of plywood, that doesn't have access to water supply, that doesn't have access to adequate sanitation, that this Barbados Labour Party administration wants more for them. And that we can balance the need to have safe, climate resilient housing with the need to make sure that they have the economic wherewithal and they have the financial access to that kind of housing. Mr. Speaker, sir, the first people who suffer in a disaster are the poor. And the reason for that is not just because they don't have the economic access, but it's also because people who tend not to have the access to the income and the opportunity and so on start to feel themselves and start to be, in practice, marginalized from the mainstream of what that economy or that society is trying to do. In simple terms, sir, we cannot continue to introduce standards and legislation and say, well, because this group of people can't afford to deliver in this way, that they are excluded. What we have to do is balance the regulation with making sure that they have the access. That is why when I spoke earlier about the housing solutions that the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Rural Development was working on, I made reference to it being affordable, resilient housing. It has to be both. So I very much agree with the honourable member from St. Michael East. But the fact is that we have to do the two at the same time. When I used to do what we called at the time damage and loss assessments after storms and hurricanes, we would deploy rapidly, we would go into the country, we would do an assessment of the loss and the damage from the disaster, and we'd be able to put a number in terms of agriculture, infrastructure, and also in terms of people's livelihoods. What are the income losses that farmers and fisher folk and everybody would suffer because of this event? And I, sir, got tired of seeing that it was poor people's homes that were destroyed and washed down the hill into the sea, washed down the hill into the river, because no one insisted that those people had a right to be safe. We have to balance that. So while we would want to drive by and say, oh shoot, they can't afford nothing more, we need to stop and make sure that they can afford to build safely in a safe place. Because those are the people who are least able to recover. Those are the people who are likely not to have anything saved up, have had no insurance, nothing. Our task is to bring everyone into the safety that we are trying to create in this country. I am not going to agree, sir, that we leave people on the margins because we put them in a certain category. We have to make sure that people in this country who suffer certain deprivations because of their level of income, that they're the first ones we have to make sure can survive a disaster. And so, with those few words, sir, I am commending this Planning and Development Amendment Bill to this House, and I ask that it be read a third time.
Second thing.
Second time.
Beg to second that, sir.
Questions that the aforementioned bill be read a second time. All those in favor, please say aye. All those who are against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that you do now leave the chair and that this House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
Beg to second that,
Speaker
sir.
do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Clauses 1 to 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 6 stand part.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is that clauses 1 to 6 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 7 to 11.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 7 to 11 stand apart.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is that clauses 7 to 11 stand apart. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 12 to 15.
I beg to move that clauses 12 to 15 stand apart.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is that clauses 12 to 15 stand apart. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 16 to 20.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 16 to 20 stand apart.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is that clauses 16 to 20 stand apart. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 21 to 23.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 21 to 23 stand apart.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is, three. Question is that clauses 1 to 23 stand, 21 to 23. Question is that clauses 21 to 23 stand apart. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg that you do now report to the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Beg to second that, ma'am.
Question is that I do now report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that this bill be passed,
No, be read a third time.
be read a third time.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question that this bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Planning and Development Amendment Act 2020.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I beg to move the adjournment of the sitting onto the 9th day of June at 10 a.m. 9th day of June at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber stands adjourned until the 9th day of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until the 9th day of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.